Welcome. We will begin shortly. Please note that this event is being recorded and will be made publicly available after its conclusion. Your audio and video are not displayed. You can also access closed captioning by clicking more info and turning it on at the bottom of your screen or wherever your control panel is. Questions may be submitted using the question and answer function during the interactive portion of the event. My name is Bruce August Jr. I will be your host for the evening as you wait for others to join the chat. I don't want you to just look at me randomly, but thank you for joining us this evening on behalf of the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Greetings from California. Thank you, Elba. We appreciate you for being here. Feel free to drop in the chat where you're chiming in from, whether you're here in Texas or California or even Alaska. We are welcome. We are welcoming you and happy to have you here with us this evening. Greetings to Alpha Kappa Delta Phi. We appreciate you all being here this evening as well. If you're joining us, feel free to place in the chat where you're chiming in from or watching from. We would love to know as we get started here in the next 30 seconds. Ottawa. Well, good evening. We got to make sure that we have all of our people on the screen. We could have our interpreter to turn her camera on, ASL interpreter. There we go. All righty, awesome. So, good evening. My name is Bruce August Jr., Assistant Director for Programming and Marketing here at the UT Dallas Multicultural Center. And it's my pleasure to welcome you here this evening to our event. On November 1st, Native American Heritage Month is celebrated to honor the remarkable Native Americans who have made many achievements to improve the nation's character. This month is American Indian and Alaska Native Heritage Month. November is the time to celebrate the diverse and rich cultures, histories, and traditions, and to appreciate the significant contributions of the Native Americans. This month allows us to amplify the awareness about tribes or educate people about the challenges faced by the Native Americans in the past and today. Throughout this month, we commit to supporting the remaining Native American tribes and informing the world about their sacrifices. In 1915, National Native American Month started as an effort to get a day of appreciation and acknowledgement for the unique contributions made by the first Americans for the growth and establishment of the United States. In 1976, President George Bush decided to declare a week for America to celebrate National Native American Heritage Month. President Ronald Reagan also proclaimed November 23rd through the 30th, 1986 as American Indian Week. And in 2009, then President Barack Obama issued a declaration to designate November as National Native American Heritage Month. The effort has now resulted in a whole month celebrated for that purpose. Over the last 15 years here at UT Dallas, the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion has celebrated the National Native American Heritage Month during the month of November through various celebrations, dance performances, diverse Indigenous speakers, professional singers, and authentic cuisine. This year is no different. We cannot talk about America without recognizing the many contributions, the rich cultural diversity, and the historical legacy of Native Americans. Our American story is rooted in the heritage of the people who were here first. I'm happy to be invited to welcome you here today. It is truly an honor to join all of you in recognizing National Native American Heritage Month. It is now also my pleasure to introduce to you the University of Texas at Dallas President, Dr. Richard Benson. After Dr. Benson speaks, Mr. Clay Gable will introduce our keynote speaker for this evening. Without further ado, Dr. Richard Benson.
Greetings, comments, and special guests. I am Richard Benson, President of UT Dallas. I am pleased to join you in recognizing a truly important part of our vibrant community during the celebration of the First Americas, the Native peoples of the United States. I want to thank the Native American Student Association for partnering with the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and the Multicultural Center in hosting today's event. Let me extend a special welcome to Dr. Wendy Smythe as our guest speaker. November is a time to intentionally celebrate the unique, rich, and diverse cultures and traditions and histories of this country's American Indian and Alaska Native nations and communities. At UT Dallas, we actively engage in a collective conversation centered around systemic issues facing Indigenous Native peoples. As such, we start by acknowledging the history and legacy of colonization. UT Dallas stands on land originally settled and occupied by the Caddo, Wichita, and Comanche people, Indigenous people who were forcibly removed through colonization. It is not an understatement to say that a greater understanding and appreciation of Indigenous culture helps us to be a better version of who we say we are and who we want to become. At UT Dallas, we have declared our intent to be a top research university, and part and parcel with that goal is the commitment to challenge the effects of injustice and inequality. So discussions like the one offered tonight allows us to not only celebrate the culture and contributions of Indigenous communities, but also ensures that we can honor our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. At UT Dallas, we are making sure that we are always progressing, moving forward into a bright future that welcomes and includes everyone. Let's carry on with our good work as we grow in our understanding and appreciation of each other.
Now I'll bring Mr. Clay Gable to the stage.
Osio, everyone. Clay Gable Dawato, Ayatsitzalagi. Basically what that means is hello, my name is Clay Gable and I am Cherokee, and I am also the president of the Native American Student Association and the Student Diversity Advisory Council. Before we get started today, I just kind of want to talk about what those groups are, how they're involved with this program tonight, and then formally introduce our speaker. So first we have the Native American Student Association. I'm the president of this student org. Our mission here is to educate UTD and its community about Native American heritage and culture while amplifying Native voices on campus. We are welcoming to all individuals, especially Native allies. Like I said, our mission is to educate UTD, so we would like to have everyone here. And if you would like to follow us on Instagram at nasa.utd, that's where we have all of our updates. And of course, our leadership is I'm the president. We currently have a vacant VP spot. Our secretary is Alaya Khan, our treasurer is Asaya Khan, and our PR person is Apollo. And if you are interested at all in filling this vice president position, please email me at my email right there. Next, we have the Diversity Council. Our mission is to act as a liaison between students and the UTD administration to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in any way that we can. We work directly with Dr. Pearson, who is the Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, as well as her office, who you will be hearing from later today, as well as we are supported by our wonderful coordinator, Jasmine Johnson. We literally couldn't do anything that we do without her, so we are so thankful for her. And we meet once a month to talk about equity and diversity issues, both on campus in the state of Texas, as well as in the nation. Our leadership is I'm the president, the vice president is my dear friend Melly Chida, and then our PR spot is vacant. And if you are interested in that, please email me again. And then you can follow us on Instagram at UTD_SDAC. And without a further ado, I would like to formally introduce you to our speaker. So Dr. Wendy Smythe is an assistant professor at the University of Minnesota Duluth and holds a joint appointment between the Departments of American Indian Studies and Earth and Environmental Sciences. She was the 2019 Professional of the Year by the American Indian Sciences and Engineering Society, also known as ACES, for her interdisciplinary research in geoscience, native education, and policy. In 2020, she was elected to the ACES Board of Directors. Dr. Smythe is a geoscientist and oceanographer whose research focuses on examining microbial ecology and molecular diversity, biogeochemistry, and biomineralization in iron and manganese-rich groundwater ecosystems. In addition, she collaborates with tribal communities working to couple STEM disciplines with traditional knowledge in K-12 education by incorporating language and cultural values. And with that, Dr. Wendy Smythe.
Thank you. Let me get my slides up. Geek Squaw Hawanda Lynn Logan, I hope you all are well. I will eventually be able to share my screen here. All right. So I'm going to talk to you tonight about Indigenous knowledge systems, place, belonging, identity in science education, but I need to start by introducing myself to you formally. Hadalas et is ontigudele lagen, di hadas hatagen, sonat las tastes onai hatayo di ijum, gst akaskusturi alagen, di klingwai klakia igagen, stahlua hinudekeong, Wendy Smythe, Yatsakith Hinudekeong, Donna Douglas, Di Al Uijung, Alec Ruth Di Chindinanu Ijung, Sam Elsie Di Chindinanu Ijung, Sanuhut Kate Di Chindinanu Ijung, Hikta Handalai Stuth Ijung. Clay?
In translation, I am of the Haida people. I am Sanatla Nas, fish egg clan of the Sculpin House Haida. I belong to the Eagle Moiety. I am an observer of the world. My Haida name is Ask Ahlua. My given name is Wendy Smythe. My mother is Donna Douglas. My grandparents are Alec and Ruth Douglas. My great-grandparents are Sam and Elsie. My great-great-grandparents are James and Annie. My great-great-great-grandparents are Chief Sanuhut and Kate. My people are from Heidelberg, Alaska.
Thank you. So I wanted to tell you who I am and show you who I am as we move into this talk tonight. So in the picture here, this is 3, 2, and 1 generations back of my family. And this is my mother and sister and me. And this is 13-year-old me. And I often like to look at these pictures together to think about what did they envision their future to be? What did they envision the future for their family? And I can tell you, 13-year-old me living in Heidelberg, Alaska, of a community, tribal community on an island of 350 people, never imagined the journey that I would be on as a cultural practitioner, having the opportunity to reclaim culture, protocol, and language. Never envisioned that I would be an oceanographer and a geoscientist. I never imagined that I would be a climate activist. And I never imagined that I would get the greatest honor of being able to mentor the next generation of Indigenous scientists within my community and across this nation. So I want to tell you that when we're in these discussions, we're in ceremony with one another. I'm going to share knowledge with you as a Haida woman, not as a scientist. I'm going to talk to you with respect about my journey. And when we engage in discussion, I expect the same respect back. I'm not asking you to believe me with some of the things that I'm going to say. Just listen and have an open mind and understand that this is the journey of a Haida woman in academia and in a colonized space. So as I said, and I am an observer of the world. That is how I say I'm a Haida scientist. And I put that in my introduction because as we move through academia, we get to a point where we have to split ourselves in two. I have to be a scientist over here. And when I go home, I'm a Haida woman, I'm a community member, and I can't have any of this science identity. And when I'm in academia, I can't have any of this Native identity, but I always have both. And so I decided to take a stand and introduce myself as a Haida scientist. And I hope that helps other students as well. As we go through these journeys, we struggle sometimes with our identity. As Haida people, we are air, land, and water people. 70% of our diet in our community is off the land, air, and water. We don't have grocery stores. And so we know that what we do to our environment, it does to us. And it provides for us if we take care of it. I do go across several different sectors as a geoscientist looking at groundwater ecosystems and biomineralization. And merging that and finding a way to merge that into Native education by coupling traditional knowledge with Western science, incorporating language, and to build curriculum for our students as part of an equitable education. I also had the opportunity to work at NSF for 2 years as a AAAS fellow, and where I got to learn more about policy diversity initiatives and was able to make recommendations on diversity. And so as a scientist, I do work across different spaces. I work in Yellowstone National Park off the coast of Hawaii at Luihi Seamount, and I work in Alaska in these three extremely different places, but they all have groundwater ecosystems. They all have iron and manganese. And I look at the bacteria in all of these systems and how geology impacts water chemistry and how that impacts microbial life and then biogeochemical cycling. And so I tie that to astrobiology, the cycling of nutrients in the environment, as well as climate change. And I find ways to couple these disciplines with traditional knowledge systems. And as I moved through my academic career in science, it became evident to me quite rapidly that there is a lack of diversity. Excuse me. So now I focus a lot of my time as well on my science research on social science research, looking at diversity in science education. We know that diversity, whether it's discipline diversity or cultural diversity, leads to innovation and creativity. We often hear about cutting edge science, but if we're all in the same place, looking at the same problem the same way, we're not doing cutting edge science. We're sitting there looking at the same thing with the same answer because we all think alike. Adding different knowledge systems allows not only us, but our students to develop and continue to develop their critical thinking skills. So here's a red cedar log. This is our problem, hypothesis, or question that you have to solve. And then when I ask audiences, so we want to get from A to B. When I ask audiences, what would you do with this red cedar log? Okay, this is your hypothesis. What are you going to do with it? Oftentimes I hear they're going to build a house or a fence or furniture. All of those things keep you at point A. They don't move you. But if you look at this a different way, with a different cultural lens, we just might get a canoe, and that'll move us from A to B. So there's the importance in having this cultural diversity and way of viewing the world to improve our science and our way of thinking. Oftentimes we hear about academia as the promise. Education is the promise. We're going to go, it's going to be amazing. We're going to do great things. There's so much opportunity, so much great things. But the reality is our students often are alienated, stressed out. They don't know what to expect. There's no support. There's a complete cultural disconnect. Oftentimes, our students leave tribal communities, like I did, of 350 people, and went into a space where there was an unspoken and unconscious idea that anyone had the right to use natives as they saw fit. And those actions were justified as and rationalized as honoring. We're honoring you. Indigeneity is considered a national heritage and an entitled right, of which it's not. We own our identity. But it was the first time seeing what mainstream society had depicted and told me who I was. That mythology has provided a narrative to define who we are as Native people. What do we look like, or what are we supposed to look like, how we act, and our intelligence. We're often depicted as drunk, poor, and unintelligent. And this idea has been institutionalized in not only the United States, but around the globe. These narratives have laid the foundation of how we are viewed through mascots and the hypersexualization of Halloween costumes. That's who we're supposed to be. That's not who we are. We have our own knowledge systems that are valid. We have our own ceremonies and spirituality. And when we go into spaces where we are not in our community, that's the first time we realize how different we are. And it can be difficult. So as we move through education, that's one obstacle, but there's also many more obstacles. Perception of self. Can I be a native scientist? Can I be both? What is the environment like? When you leave a tribal community of 350 people, you know what eagles and ravens sound like. You know what boats sound like. You've never heard trains, you've never heard sirens, and you've never heard the voices of thousands and hundreds of people. It's overwhelming. And so it's a different space to be in, but we don't think of what we're asking students to do when we recruit them into academia. Is there support within the community, at home and at school? Do they have the knowledge base? Are we providing that? Do they know how to access financial support? What are the expectations of being in academia? And what resources are there? And then tokenism. How are we introduced? And we'll talk more about that in a few slides. All of this is just a few obstacles. There's many more. But what we need to know is that they're grounded in historical trauma. And that trauma is alive and well in our communities. I'm one generation removed from boarding school. My mother was in boarding school. My grandfather was in boarding school. It has informed and impacted the obstacles in my life because of the fear around education. We also have knowledge systems that we have to consider when we're working with Indigenous populations. We have a holistic traditional knowledge or traditional ecological knowledge, and we have Western science. And when we look at these two knowledge systems and hear how they're explained in mainstream media and mainstream society, we often have deficit-based language around traditional knowledge systems. It's mythical, it's irrational, it's only qualitative. That's not true. But when we look at Western science, it's always asset-based language. There's an assumption that there's a hierarchy between traditional knowledge and Western science, but there's not. At the core, they have similar methods. They're two distinct knowledge systems that exist and coexist. An Indigenous student should have the right to maintain their cultural knowledge and use that knowledge, excuse me, in Western science settings. When we look at two knowledge systems, it enriches how we view the world. It enriches how we do our science. Again, we go back to critical thinking development. What kind of scientist are we if we willingly ignore another knowledge system because we don't like it, or we don't want to use it, or we don't want to talk about it? That's not how we use data, right? As scientists, we're supposed to consider everything. That holistic knowledge system tells us the history of place. If we're out doing geology or water chemistry, botany, soil chemistry, the history of that place informs the science we do today. How the landscape changed from indigenous people being there informs the science we do today. So we have to acknowledge these two systems and use them to inform us in what we're doing and why we're finding the results we're finding today. So I'll quickly tell you a story, and then I'll go into how we can tie that system into coupling traditional and Western sciences. We have a Haida story about water, where Raven, he's our creator, and he's a trickster, and he's only got seawater. He's flying over this vast ocean, and he finds Eagle. And Eagle, for some reason, has some fresh water, and Raven's really thirsty. And he asks Eagle for water, and Eagle says no, and he puts it away, locks it up, hides it. The next day, Raven comes back and asks again, can I have some water? And Eagle again says no, locks it up and puts it away. But on day 3, Eagle forgot to hide the water and forgot to lock it up. So Raven stole some water. He scooped it up in his beak and flew away. He dropped one drop of water, and when it hit the land, it created rivers. But it ran away. He dropped another drop of water, and it ran away. And he destieg, and his mind was sick. He was stressed about this. And the third time he dropped the water, he bent it in a circle so that it would not run away. Now, what does that story have to do with Western science? My slide will advance here in a second. Okay, so if we take traditional knowledge in this story, let's consider this is a cedar bark. So we use all of the tree. This is woven and it's called plates. So if we imagine this one knowledge system as a whole thing, but there's little pieces in there. Each plate is biology, chemistry, social science, spirituality, geology. It's all contained in one idea. That's how we teach our students. And when they move into academia or an education system, they're taught very differently, compartmentalized, siloed ways of viewing science. And this can be a hard transition to make, where everything's connected to where everything is separated. But what if we teach our students everything together? That there's two ways of viewing the world and two ways of things interacting. We know that our siloed sciences are connected. What we know about one discipline informs what we know about another. And when we tie in traditional knowledge, we also have this bidirectional flow of knowledge of how holistically do these disciplines impact our environment and our earth. So if we reimagine science education, when we talk about bending the water and using a story, using that traditional knowledge to teach about the water cycle, we can talk about condensation, precipitation, and evaporation. That is what they were talking about with bending the water. The second drop of water, where Raven's mind was sick, is talking about a drought. Time when there was no food security because plants weren't growing, the fish weren't running. So if we can take these stories and tie them into the Western science, we can work with traditional knowledge. We can work with our K-12 students to bring them to a place of learning from a cultural lens that they understand and know. And we can also ease them into another way of thinking when they go into academia. A few things to remember though. When we're using traditional knowledge systems, we have to respect the intellectual ownership of that knowledge. We can't just take it. We have to acknowledge that it was created or discovered tens of thousands of years ago, and it is still relevant today. And we also have to learn the culture that knowledge came from, because we have to do the proper meaning making. What were they trying to tell us? What information were they passing on? If we don't know that, we cannot correctly interpret what was supposed to be passed on, and we can't define it with our own lens. Okay. So when we look at education and we have our students, we need to consider the intersections for their own security. And when I talk about security, I'm talking about emotional and physical security. And we can take 3 elements as the foundation of that security. One is looking at place. And I talk about place because I'm a geoscientist and we do a lot of field trips, and we take students on field trips in biology, for ecology, anthropology. We do field-based science. What does that place mean to different populations? Do we even think about it? An example. On the left is an image of Mount Vernon in Virginia. It's the home of George Washington. And if you ask different groups, what does this place mean to you? You would get very different answers. In the US, lots of students get taken there on field trips. It's a place of pride, and it's viewed as a place of pride. But if you asked an Indigenous person from this land, what does this place mean to you? It is a place of dispossession. It's a place of loss of culture, loss of language, and loss of life. You ask an African American, what does this place mean to you? Again, it's a place of loss. When you go into this place, they talk about there were slaves here, but they were happy. I don't believe that. We can't take a narrative and sell it and twist it any way we want. That is not a place of happiness. That is a place of loss again. So we have to consider, where are we taking our students? Who are we taking, and why are we taking them there? And how does that impact their identity as a student and as a scientist? If we take them to a place of trauma and don't acknowledge that, we are furthering that trauma. We impact their identity. So how do we make sure that they understand and that we build their sense of identity as a scientist, and that they have a connection to place or understand that history of place and the sense of belonging? I have a lot of students that I mentor that do internships, and I get a call about 2 or 3 weeks in, and I think I'm going to quit this. I don't belong here. I'm made to feel like I don't belong here. And I have to stop them for a second and say, what do you see? Do you see anyone who looks like you? Well, no. All right. Do you see any imagery that you can identify with? No. Okay, that's signaling to you you don't belong there? Not really. What ends up happening is things are said to them, you're here because you're Native, and they have a loss of belonging. You're here because of this. It's never for their scholarship. And so I asked them, I showed them these maps. On the right is a language map of Alaska, and on the left is cultural regions of the United States. No matter where you go, you are on Native land. No matter what building you walk in, what floor you're on, know you're on Native land and you belong where you are. When we are able to connect our students to place, build their identity and their sense of belonging, they have that emotional security to be retained within the sciences. But one of the other things we have to think about is their physical security as well. So one of the things we look at when we do these field-based sciences is, this is a Southern Poverty Law Center map of hate groups in the United States. So we look at these because where are we taking our students to do field work? Often they're dropped off and, in a transect. And so we're not with them all the time. Are we bringing them to a safe space? Are we driving through a safe space? Is the building we're going to eat in safe for them? So we look at these things, and we have to consider these things when we have our students and we take them to occupy space. Is it safe? And then looking at, language and identity. I already talked about the deficit language and asset language in knowledge systems. But oftentimes when we look at how we are depicted in society and how we are described as diverse people, diverse scholars, it is always based in deficit language: minority, underrepresented, marginalized, underserved. Also ties into our racial identity. This is our Native faculty. I've been introduced like that so many times, it's not even funny. How come I can't just be a faculty member? How come I couldn't just be a student? Words drive conversation. They deepen understanding and create relationships. And they can also perpetuate negative stereotypes and exclude and dehumanize diverse populations and people. We have to identify problematic language because it challenges the speaker to communicate more clearly when they think about who they're describing and why they're describing them the way they are. Also, why do we have to be described this way? Again, I've been described as introduced many times as Native faculty. And I quickly correct whoever's introducing me because I'm just a new faculty member. When we identify someone as their race, we're saying they're there because of their race. That is a form of lateral violence. I'm not there because of my race. I'm there because of my scholarship, and I own my identity. I own that I'm Native, and when I'm ready to tell someone, I will do so, and it's my right to do so, right? So we have to think about how we do these things and how we interact with other people and how it challenges their identity and sense of belonging and othering of people. When we talk about identity, I like to own your identity. We are the survivors of ethnocide. We are the survivors of forced assimilation. And oftentimes we're told, you don't look. You don't look. You have green eyes, light skin. You don't look Native. In this picture are all Haida people. In the top right, those are all my relatives. We all look very different. How are we supposed to look? On the left, the top is my son, and on the bottom is my daughter. They look completely different. They are both Haida Hawaiians, but they look completely different. So how are we supposed to look? I want to talk to the students. You are the dream of your ancestors. You occupying these spaces, reclaiming your culture and language is a manifestation of that dream. My auntie talks about when she was in boarding school and she was in her 90s, she'd talk about at night she would whisper to her baby doll in Haida so she wouldn't forget. She was the last Haida speaker, fluent Haida speaker in my family. She held on to that so she could teach us and pass it on. Know that every day when you occupy these spaces, you are a manifestation of a dream. You are where you're supposed to be. Your hair color, your skin color, where you live, on or off the reservation, does not determine who you are. You will be told they do, but they don't. No one gets to tell you who you are. No one gets to tell you you're not enough. No one gets to question your blood quantum, this made up idea of who a Native is. Those words are from a colonized mind. So know that you are a manifestation of a dream of reclamation of language and culture. As we move through these spaces, we end up battling again with our cultural responsibility. On the left is what we list as cultural responsibility for Haida women and men. And on the right, a summary of academia. And I live in these two worlds, and I have to reconcile these two responsibilities a lot of the time. And it gets me in trouble a lot of the time. As an early career faculty, untenured, I am expected to comply and not argue and not challenge. But as a Haida woman, it is my responsibility to speak up. If I think something is culturally inappropriate, speak up. And we're not expected to do that. And I have to justify these two worlds. And you'll be challenged as you move through your careers to balance these two worlds and to explain to people that you have a cultural responsibility that's different. And what can you live with? And it's okay to change. They change as you go through life. I have chosen my cultural responsibility over my professional academic responsibility because that's what I can live with. And it'll be different for each of you. But know that when you feel that conflict, it's very real. You're in both of these worlds and you have to find a way to balance it. Okay? But what we can do when we can tie all of this together is we can affect community change. Okay? This is a word cloud of 70 students, 5th through 12th grade. I asked them to describe a scientist with 3 words. 70 students said the same 7 words. Unbelievable. White, male, and then stereotype, glasses, lab coat, crazy hair. I realized right away these students were missing something. So I started bringing in Native scientists, Native engineers, medical professionals, Haida linguists, environmental planners. And in 1 year, I asked them that question again. and they changed it. What didn't show up on the first one was female, and 60% of those students were female, and not one identified as a scientist. But after a year of bringing in female scientists, Native scientists, what we found was a shift, a foundational shift in identity. They describe male and female. They put in a core cultural value of yachtang, respect. They said Native. So now this Native student, this female, sees herself as the potential of being a scientist. The really cool part of this is the really small words, curly hair, short, tall. That is a personal descriptor. That's not a description of a scientist. That is a description of a student. Seeing themselves personally as a scientist. This is a foundational shift in identity within 1 year. We can make these community changes rapidly. And when I talk about community, I'm talking about tribal community or the community in a classroom. We can make these changes. We can make a foundational change. But you are the change maker. Know that you're the change maker. We are here to put ourselves out of a job. We're here to bring you in to the space. We're here to make space for you so that you can navigate it easier than we did. And you're going to come in here and you're going to occupy space and bring that next generation up. Identify a need. What do you see that is needed in the space you occupy? Learn the culture of that space, the culture of the department, the culture of the discipline, because then you're going to learn how to implement that change. Develop a plan on how you're going to meet that need and be brave. It's hard. It's hard to stand up and say, there's something wrong here and we need to change it. It's hard. Build advocates, build allies, find your voice. We're often expected to be quiet. We're tied into a stereotype. You can speak up with respect. You can have a voice with respect. And then facilitate change. And when you facilitate that change, you're creating an opportunity for the next generation. So I want to show you this mural that just went up in Seattle. This is a mural depicting, there's a artist going around the country painting murals of diverse women in science. And this is a mural of my work. This is the Air, Land, and Water Haida Women. And it's weaving together traditional knowledge and Western science. This was a huge honor for several reasons. I was able to bring 50 people from my community, students and elders, and show them this. This is the first depiction, public depiction of traditional knowledge in a positive way that they've ever seen. Okay. Hope is to empower Native youth and diverse scholars to embrace their identity and to embrace their knowledge systems. And the other part of it is to heal what education means to our people. Again, it's grounded in trauma. It's grounded in pain. We had a 93-year-old elder there telling us that when she went to school, she was kicked with steel-toed boots and she has scars on her legs. That is what education means to her. This is a way of changing that. It's the first depiction in a public space. It's 30 feet by 40 feet. It's huge. Also, we have our language on there. We have 5 or less Haida speakers. So we were able to hold public space, not only with traditional knowledge and Western science together, but to also put our language in there. Ajiwadluwan, Gudalkwagan, everything is related, everything is connected. And we can connect traditional knowledge, our identities, to Western science to build a better place for our students and in this world. With that, I need to acknowledge the elders who have guided me, loved me, supported me, and taught me along this journey, Hawa Dangat Kalagan, and to the community that has embraced me and allowed me to teach in that community. With that, I'll say Hawa Dangat Kalagan. Thank you so much.
Wow. Thank you, Dr. Smythe. We really appreciate sharing with us your wealth of knowledge. I know we're just scratching the surface, but I really want to thank you. So for those who can put some fire in the chat, some hand claps, that would be great. I know we have a couple of questions from some of our attendees. So I'm going to start with the first one. Mohini says, how do we combat the perception of history / social science as not hard or quote unquote real sciences, given that they shape our knowledge systems just as much as any natural science?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's a shift coming in the geosciences, specifically in the earth sciences, where we are now incorporating social science. We are working with social scientists, and they are very much part of our projects. But when we look at the hard or real sciences, we have a problem there already too, right? They're disconnected and they're not connected. So we have to learn how to connect those first, and then we can start bringing in other social science. But if we advocate for it and show how it's important, because it informs our science, right? If we know the history of place, an example, in Louisiana, there's mounds all over Louisiana. If we didn't know why they were built there, we'd be scratching our head saying, wow, this is really cool. What happened to shape this landscape? Native people happened. They built those mounds all over Louisiana. But if we didn't look at that history, we would never know that. And we have the same thing happening in the South. There's a paper that came out in Science Journal last year on the impacts of slavery.
Wow.
Slaves brought over seeds and plants, and that transformed the chemistry of the soil. But we have to acknowledge the history, and we don't. Who wants to do that? Because then we have to look at who we are, right? We have to look at how our country formed. We have to own what was done, but we also have to make sure that we understand how history shapes that place, and we have to understand how social science shapes that place. And so it's a hard journey, but if we advocate for it, we will get there. And like I said, the geosciences is starting to tie that in and really raise the awareness of history of place, who impacted it, what in this country impacted that, because it does impact our science today.
Wow.
It does.
You would never think. I would never thought about it from that perspective. So, wow. Okay. I know we got a lot of things going on in the chat, but please put your questions in the question and answer box. I'm going to go to the next one. Harsha says, this has been so powerful thus far. I am listening as an ally to my First Nations brothers and sisters, and I'm so grateful to listen. I once heard from an elder that what we can do as allies is bring this allyship to every table that we're at. Do you have any advice for our allies, Dr. Smythe?
Absolutely. I work in this space. We have a film out on allies and allyship.
Yes, ma'am.
And so one of the things to think about, how did you become an ally? Who named you an ally? Because there's a spectrum. Okay. You had to be a mentee. You have to be mentored first to get to that allyship. You have to learn the community that you're advocating for. You have to learn their experiences and their history, because you can't advocate for someone you don't know. You cannot advocate for someone you don't know. So you need to learn who we are, and you need to learn our history, because you're going to be the voice that someone listens to over ours. First of all. Second, when you get that space to occupy, bring someone in from that community to speak. Give them their voice back. Give them their voice back. And that's part of power sharing, which can be scary, right? We come in with the mentality of replacing ourselves. Oftentimes careers are built on us, on speaking for us. So an ally will make that space and then bring us in to speak for ourselves. We can speak for ourselves. We have a voice. We know how to use it. And the other part is know the power in your voice and be that change maker when someone won't listen to us. Don't be afraid, because when you're an ally, you're a target. Know that. Know that. You're not going to be an ally and always be happy. You're going to be a target, and be okay with that. It's okay. We're a target all the time and we're doing just fine. I hope
Very
that
well said.
answers that question. I hope that answers.
I hope so, because, I see a lot going on. Harsha said, thank you so much. Wow, indeed. Make the space and let people hear. So I think we got what we needed. Dr. Pearson made a interesting comment in the chat. Until recently, there were schools in Texas that were teaching slavery as immigration.
Yeah. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's yeah. Oh boy.
Right. Internship. That's the
that's
latest
it.
thing I heard.
Yeah, that's a wow, how do I say this? Is it an easy way of trying to discuss it? It's easy on their soul, but not the reality, right? Because what it makes me think of, as well as when we hear speak English. Speak English. Okay, you came to a land of 1,000 languages. There was thousands of tribes here. We spoke different languages, and you demanded we speak one. We had people that gave up their culture willingly and their language, and that's their right to do that. But they came to this country and forced us to do the same, and we didn't ask for that. So then there's this struggle of how do we present ourselves in that true light?
Right.
Forced assimilation, slavery is forced assimilation. That's more than forced assimilation. We can't sugarcoat these things because they're not sweet. They're not sweet. There's a lot of suffering. And we have to acknowledge it, because if we don't look at it and acknowledge it, we will go back and do it again.
Right. I agree.
And we can't allow that to happen. We cannot allow that to happen. And I think we see this playing out right now, especially with, I think you all remember Standing Rock. That was the beginning. It's been amazing to see what's happened. We saw elders arrested when they were arrested 40, 50 years earlier for doing a similar thing. And what happened this time is that the youth and the young people saw it and said, no more. This is not okay. If we don't use our voice, what we know, not using our voice is death. Sugarcoating it is death. Teaching slavery as immigration is death. And it's disrespectful. It's disrespectful to the people who suffered because of these things. It really is.
Food for thought. Definitely. You're lighting some fires even in my personal. So thank you. Thank you for that. I'm sorry, we're just working on some future programming. And when you don't consider the past, you really are doomed to repeat it. And so as we get ready for our spring programs, you just gave me some things to really consider.
Yeah, and you don't see the whole picture. You can't just look. It's looking at the world with one eye open. You're gonna miss everything going on over here.
Right. I agree.
If you choose to live that way, that's on you. But we can't continue as a collective group to continue to live that way. We can't. It's yeah. And when we learn, because we're just learning who we are, right? As Native people, our elders don't tell us how they suffered, and they're just now telling us. And it's painful to see people, strong people, tell us the pain they suffered and endured, and we never knew. And now we know why we didn't know. They didn't want us to hurt, and they didn't teach us because they were afraid. They were afraid. Right. And so we have to reclaim that, to respect and honor the sacrifices of our ancestors. We have that response. That is our responsibility, to honor that pain, because that's how we heal.
Getting deep. So Sunny has one more question. I believe I got to get going. My people in the background telling me. Sunny is interested in, and they appreciate your comments on the use of categorizing language, minority, marginalized, etc. As a philosopher of race, that the field uses these terms commonly in research when referencing groups. Do you recommend more inclusive language in research work on social and group theory?
Yes. Now you're talking about theory. I'm not sure about the social theory, but we are, maybe this will answer your question. So we are, I'm part of a project where we are teaching diversity to field leaders and geoscientists. And what we're doing is starting with this language of identity. diverse scholars. And we're working with funding agencies when they put solicitations out.
Yes.
Call us a diverse scholar. Call us something, base it in asset language, because what you're doing, and it's an ingrained thing, right? It's a normal term, minority. It's normalized. But really, when we introduce someone as a minority, you're less than.
Mm.
When you introduce me as a native faculty, what you've just told that other faculty member is I am there because of my racial identity and not my scholarship. And they will never believe anything I say. Never.
Wow.
Because that's how I was introduced and that's how you see me. But when we turn around, and what I did is said, well, this is my white dean. She was offended because I called her white. Why is that offensive? So I guess I hope that answers your question. But that's how I think about it. And we're trying to change the language broadly. We're trying to change it in funding agencies when they put out solicitations and how they talk about us too, because it is normalized, but we need to change it. And it's not political. I know we hear a lot about, oh, it's political. It's not political. It's respectful. And that's very different.
Sunny says that was amazingly helpful. They thank you and they love the use of words that uphold achievement, words that don't further marginalize people. We have an anonymous person in the chat. They want to know, would you say the shift to a new outlook on education is a form of indigenous resistance?
I think it's decolonizing. I don't know if I think it's resistance every day when we learn and reclaim who we are, right? We're resisting it being taken away from us and us being made to be ashamed of it. We're taught to be ashamed of it because we're a drunk native over here. That's not who I am. I have 2 PhDs. I'm just fine. And so had I had traditional knowledge coupled with Western science, I might have done some other things. I don't know.
Right.
We would have had more. We would have had more of us in the field, right?
Cool. So last question. I know they're saying get to the giveaway, but last question. Casey wants to know, how can they do what you do? And are you accepting mentees? And then we'll move to the rest of the program.
Just do it. just do it. Again, go back to the find the need and how to fill it. Now, Casey, are you a student, a graduate student? That's where I would ask you some. Okay, so I do have a summer internship where we take on 8 students to do coupling traditional knowledge with Western science, and we also teach policy, because when we move through these things, when we work with our tribes and when we work in academia, we are impacting policy and we are acting out policy by coupling these 2 systems together. It is very political. It's policy. We are changing policy in our communities. So I can share that information on the internship. You can also, I have a website for work. You can email me as well, and I will send that information out for the internship.
Awesome. So I'm going to turn the thank you, Dr. Smythe. Really appreciate you. We're going to turn our program over to Clay, and he's going to take us to for the rest of the evening. Thank you so much. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Hello. So I will be announcing who won the giveaway when I get that information. The Wheel of Fortune. Here we go. Laura Goldstein, you win the giveaway. Do I know what you win? No, but cool. And Mohini.
Well, thank you so much. Congratulations to our prize winners. Our staff will be reaching out to you via email to tell you how you can claim your prize, or we can get it to you if you're joining us from far away. I just want to say thank you so much to everyone for taking time to join us this evening. And thank you, Dr. Smythe, for sharing your wisdom, your experience, and your expertise with us. I would like to also extend special thanks to the Native American Student Association and the Student Diversity Advisory Council for suggesting and co-hosting this event, and to our teams in the Department of Institutional Diversity Initiatives and the Multicultural Center for organizing and co-hosting as well. To become a truly just, equitable, and inclusive campus, we must first acknowledge our shortcomings and our history. And that's why our land acknowledgement that President Benson shared is so important. But we can't stop there. So I challenge us as a campus community to act upon Dr. Smythe's words and implement strategies for not only recognizing the value and importance of Indigenous knowledge systems, place, identity, and belonging, but also to integrate this knowledge into our teaching, our research, and our operations, much like the plates in the woven cedar image that she shared. And I want to take this opportunity to communicate to all of our Native students, faculty, staff, and friends, you belong here. Before you log off, please take a moment to complete our survey. There's a link for it in the chat. We are always interested in learning about your experiences at our events and how we can continuously improve. So with that, I'll say good night, happy Native American Heritage Month, and thank you again. Please stay safe and well.